The clang of tools and the faint scent of motor oil filled the air at Mason's Auto and Repair, a modest but well-kept garage on the outskirts of a quiet town where life moved at a steady, unhurried pace. Liam Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic with grease-streaked hands and a quiet determination, worked tirelessly beneath the hood of a worn-out sedan, humming a tune that only he recognized. He had always found solace in the rhythmic dance of wrenches, the smooth glide of a fresh coat of oil, the satisfying purr of an engine finally brought back to life. Though life had thrown its fair share of hardships his way, Liam had a knack for finding meaning in his work, believing that he wasn't just fixing cars. He was, in his own small way, fixing people's days. A well-tuned engine meant a father could get to work on time, a mother could drive her kids to school safely, a teenager could make it to their first job interview without a hitch. It was this simple philosophy that kept him going, that made each long night in the garage worth it. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the small town, when a hesitant knock echoed against the garage door. Liam, wiping his hands on a grease-streaked rag, turned toward the sound and saw a boy no older than 9 sitting just outside the open door in a wheelchair. His small frame was wrapped in a faded, worn-out blanket, and the wheelchair itself looked just as exhausted, its scuffed frame patched with duct tape, one wheel wobbling as if on the verge of collapse. Standing beside him was a woman in her mid-30s, presumably his mother, her expression tired yet kind, the kind of look carried by those who had long learned to endure life's hardships with quiet resilience. She hesitated before stepping forward, pushing the wheelchair slightly. "Excuse me," she began, her voice unsure but hopeful. "Are you Liam Carter?" Liam nodded, stepping out from behind the car, his eyes instinctively assessing the boy's chair, already understanding why they were here. "That's me," he said, his voice carrying the ease of someone always ready to lend a hand. "How can I help?" The boy looked up at him, brown eyes filled with quiet apprehension, his fingers gripping the frayed edges of his blanket. It was his mother who spoke again. "My son, Daniel. His wheelchair's been giving us trouble," she said, glancing at it with frustration and helplessness. "I've taken it to a few places, but no one seems able to fix it. Someone in town said you're good with anything that has wheels." There was a note of desperate hope in her voice, as though she feared she was asking for too much, but had no other choice. Liam crouched to Daniel's level, offering a warm, reassuring smile, his calloused hands reaching out to examine the wheelchair. "Well, they weren't wrong," he said with an easy confidence. "Mind if I take a look?" Daniel hesitated only a second before nodding, watching with careful eyes as Liam wheeled the chair under the bright overhead lights of the garage. The problem wasn't just one thing, it was several. The wheel bearings were worn out, the frame bent from years of use, the brakes barely working, and the seat cushion was flattened to the point of discomfort. It was clear that this chair had been through a lot, and just like its young owner, it had fought to keep going despite the odds stacked against it. Liam straightened, rubbing the back of his neck thoughtfully. "This isn't just a quick patch-up job," he admitted, "but I think I can fix it." The mother's shoulders sagged slightly in relief, a small breath escaping her lips. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "I don't know how much something like this will cost, but—" Liam shook his head before she could finish, already reaching for his tools. "Don't worry about that," he said firmly. "I'll take care of it." Her eyes widened. "But—" "No buts," Liam interrupted gently, glancing at Daniel with a smile. "Daniel here needs his wheels, and I've got the tools and the time. That's all that matters." For the next couple of hours, Liam worked with the kind of precision and dedication he applied to every project, though this time there was something deeper driving him. He straightened the frame, replaced the worn-out bearings with spares he had lying around, reinforced the armrests, and adjusted the wheels to ensure a smooth glide. He even took the time to polish the wheelchair, making it look almost brand new. As he worked, he chatted with Daniel, asking about his favorite hobbies and what kind of mischief he liked to get into. At first, the boy was quiet, answering in short, shy responses. But as the minutes passed and Liam's easygoing nature put him at ease, Daniel's voice grew more animated. He spoke of his love for comic books, how he dreamed of becoming an artist one day, how he spent hours sketching superheroes in a worn-out notebook. His laughter filled the garage as he described his favorite characters, and Liam listened, genuinely engaged, enjoying the rare sound of unfiltered joy in a place usually filled with nothing but the hum of engines. Finally, with a satisfied grin, Liam stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "All done," he announced, wheeling the chair toward Daniel. The boy's face lit up, his hands running over the smooth, polished frame. "It looks amazing," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "Give it a spin," Liam encouraged. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before maneuvering himself into the chair. He moved it forward, then backward, then spun in a small circle, a wide grin spreading across his face as he giggled in delight. "It's perfect," he exclaimed. His mother's eyes glistened with tears as she turned to Liam. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you." Liam waved her off with an easy shrug. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Seeing that smile? That's more than enough." As the mother and son left the garage, Daniel waving enthusiastically from his newly repaired wheelchair, Liam felt a deep sense of fulfillment settle in his chest. He hadn't just fixed a wheelchair. He had given a boy his independence back. And while he didn't think much of it at the time, that single act of kindness would soon set off a chain of events that would change his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Weeks passed, and Mason's auto and repair returned to its usual rhythm. The days were long, filled with the familiar scent of gasoline and the constant demands of customers needing urgent repairs. The memory of Daniel and his broken wheelchair lingered in the back of Liam's mind, not as something he dwelled on, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures had the greatest impact. He didn't expect anything to come of it. He had done what he always did, helped where he could, and expected nothing in return. But fate had a different plan. It was a clear, crisp Saturday morning when something unusual happened. The garage was alive with the familiar symphony of metallic clinks, the steady hum of an engine being tested, the occasional laughter of customers chatting as they waited. Liam was in the middle of tightening a bolt when a strange sound reached his ears, something distant yet unmistakably out of place. At first, he dismissed it as just another plane from the small airport nearby. But as the sound grew louder, more distinct, he frowned, stepping outside and squinting against the morning sun. Then he saw it. Descending from the sky was a private jet. Its sleek, white body gleamed under the sunlight, its engines roaring as it prepared to land, right outside his garage. Liam stood frozen in place, his mind struggling to catch up with the reality unfolding before him. The private jet, its sleek white body gleaming in the golden morning light, touched down with an almost surreal elegance, its tires skimming the stretch of unused road just outside his garage before rolling to a smooth stop. The roar of its engines faded, replaced by an eerie hush that settled over the small crowd of customers, neighbors, and curious passers-by who had gathered to witness the spectacle. It was the kind of sight that didn't belong here, in this quiet town where life was predictable. And the most exciting thing to happen was the annual county fair. A private jet landing in front of Mason's Auto and Repair? It felt like something out of a dream or a prank. Liam's hands, still dusted with grease, clenched at his sides as he squinted toward the open hatch, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, descending from the steps with an air of effortless confidence, came a man whose polished shoes and perfectly tailored suit seemed utterly out of place against the dusty pavement. Following close behind him was a face Liam recognized immediately: Daniel. The boy beamed, his small hands gripping the sides of his newly repaired wheelchair as he carefully navigated down the steps. Behind him, his mother followed, her expression a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Liam's pulse quickened, his confusion deepening. What on earth was going on? He wiped his hands on a rag out of habit, forcing himself to step forward just as the well-dressed man approached with an extended hand. "Liam Carter," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to commanding attention. "I'm Richard Ellington, CEO of Ellington Industries." He gave Liam a firm handshake before gesturing toward the boy at his side. "I believe you've already met my nephew, Daniel." Liam blinked, glancing from Richard to Daniel, who grinned and gave a small wave. "Uncle Richard wanted to meet you," the boy said cheerfully. Liam felt a strange mix of emotions swirl in his chest: pride, curiosity, and a deep, nagging suspicion that this was leading to something far bigger than he could have imagined. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Ellington," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But I have to admit, I'm not sure why you flew a private jet out here just to shake my hand." Richard let out a chuckle, his gaze steady. "I suppose that does seem a bit dramatic," he admitted. "The short answer is, you. My sister told me how you went out of your way to repair Daniel's wheelchair, free of charge, simply because it was the right thing to do, and I wanted to personally thank you for that." Liam shifted on his feet, scratching the back of his neck. "It wasn't a big deal," he said with a shrug. "The kid needed his wheels, and I had the tools. Anyone would have done the same." Richard's expression turned serious, his blue eyes locking onto Liam's with an intensity that made it clear he didn't agree. "That's where you're wrong," he said firmly. "Not everyone would have done what you did, and that act of kindness made all the difference for Daniel. He's been happier and more independent than I've seen him in years." Daniel's mother stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "Liam, I can't thank you enough," she said, her hands clasped together as if trying to contain the overwhelming gratitude welling inside her. "You didn't just fix a wheelchair, you gave my son his freedom back. And for that, our family is forever grateful." Liam swallowed, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his throat. He wasn't the type to seek recognition or praise. He did things because they needed to be done, not for the thanks that might follow. But hearing those words, seeing the sincerity in their eyes, it struck something deep inside him. Before he could find the right words to respond, Richard gestured toward the jet, his lips curving into a knowing smile. "But we didn't just come here to thank you with words," he said. "We have something for you." From inside the plane, two men emerged, carrying a large, heavy-looking object wrapped in dark fabric. They set it down carefully before pulling away the covering, revealing a gleaming, high-end toolbox stocked with tools so pristine they seemed to shimmer under the sunlight. Liam's breath hitched. It was the kind of equipment he had only ever dreamed of owning, the kind that would make his work easier, more efficient, more precise. He ran his fingers over the smooth metal, his mind struggling to process the generosity before him. "This is yours," Richard said simply, "a small token of appreciation from our family to yours." Liam opened his mouth, then closed it, words failing him. The weight of this gesture, the sheer unexpectedness of it, left him momentarily speechless. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice hoarse. But Richard wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a neatly folded document, holding it out to Liam. "There's one more thing," he said. Liam hesitated before taking the paper, his eyes scanning the contents. It took him a moment to fully register what he was looking at. A community grant, a substantial one, enough to expand his garage, upgrade his equipment, maybe even hire a few extra hands. His fingers tightened around the paper as his heart pounded in his chest. He looked up, disbelief written all over his face. "Why would you do this for me?" he asked quietly. Richard smiled, placing a firm hand on Liam's shoulder. "Because people like you deserve to be recognized," he said. "You didn't just fix a wheelchair. You reminded us that the world is a better place when we look out for one another." Daniel piped up, his grin wide. "And because you're the best mechanic ever." The small crowd that had gathered erupted into cheers and applause. Neighbors patted Liam on the back, customers congratulated him, and for the first time in years, Liam felt truly seen, not just as a mechanic, but as someone who had made a real difference. His whole life, he had simply done what needed to be done, never expecting anything in return. And yet, here he was, standing in front of a crowd that recognized the quiet, unnoticed efforts he had poured into his work. It was humbling. It was overwhelming. It was life-changing. Later that evening, long after the jet had taken off and the crowd had dispersed, Liam sat in the quiet of his garage, the new toolbox gleaming beside him. He ran a hand over its smooth surface, his mind replaying the day's events over and over. He had never done anything for the sake of reward, yet somehow kindness had found its way back to him in ways he never could have anticipated. He thought about Daniel, about the joy on the boy's face as he tested out his newly repaired wheelchair, and he realized something important. It wasn't about the tools or the grant or the recognition. It was about knowing that he had helped change a life. And as Liam leaned back in his chair, a slow, contented smile spread across his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, one that had nothing to do with fixing cars and everything to do with fixing what truly mattered.